Welcome to the Popcorn Talk Network, for the online broadcast network that features movie discussion, news, and interviews. Press 1.
Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
From the Popcorn Talk Network, the online broadcast network for movie talk, Alicia Malone with Scott, Movie Mantz, and the Schmoes Know. This is Profiles. In-depth spotlights on the greatest filmmakers and artists in motion picture history.
Hello, Profilers! Welcome to episode 49.
What?
49, Miss Malone.
That's almost a year.
49.
If it was one a week.
It's a year and a half that we've been doing the show.
Wow.
Started in August 11th, and here it is, the March. Episode 49, a director that, when we were like talking about doing this guy, like a lot of people were like, I don't know, I don't love his movies, and other people are like, I love his movies, and that just made me want to do him more.
Yeah, me too.
Terrence Malick.
Yeah.
What is the word that comes to your mind? The first word that comes to your mind for Terrence Malick?
Divisive.
Polarizing.
Polarizing.
Poetic.
Experimental.
In a class all by himself.
Unique.
Very, very unique. This is a filmmaker, 7 feature films, an 8th one he already finished that has not opened yet, but 7 feature films, including his current movie, Night of Cups. Mm-hmm. And we have a very special guest in tonight's show that we interviewed. We sat down with Christian Bale.
Oh, there you go.
Who is in Night of Cups, and he was also in The New World. And to sit down with Christian Bale and interview him on camera for our show Profiles was awesome.
It was so good, and he was very intrigued by our show and the concept behind it. So you'll see him asking us all sorts of questions about Profiles as well.
Half the interview was him talking to us.
I know.
I wanted to know, what's the Profile show? Like, who do you do?
You're like, we'll send it to you.
But the point
is so nice.
Is that Christian Bale knows about Profiles.
He knows about Profiles, and he knows about Terrence Malick, and he's someone who obviously loves working with Terrence Malick. I am someone who's definitely firmly on the Terrence Malick camp, as are you. Mm-hmm. It's our jam, and we never mind a bit of experimental cinema. A lot of people don't like him. A lot of people think that he's quite pretentious, or his movies have lost their way. They've become more and more experimental as they've gone on.
Not
but
structured,
I think he has actually found his groove as he goes on. And I really relate to them all. I love just watching the images, like having them wash over me, and having an experience unlike any other at the theater.
Now, what was it like going back and rewatching these movies? Were there any that you liked more after watching it again, or maybe some that you like go, I don't like it as much as I did when I first saw it?
Yeah, I think Tree of Life is one that I like more every time I see it.
Yeah.
And also The New World.
Oh, The New World, I got to tell you, The New World, from going back and rewatching the 5 movies on our Fast 5, all of them benefited from repeated viewings.
Yeah.
And The New World is the one that really jumped big time for me. I mean, I liked it a lot when I first saw it in 2005, and I had seen it a couple of times, but that was definitely the movie that I just went, wow, this is really an exquisite, beautiful film.
That's the thing. His movies, I think, need to be seen a couple of times. It seems like the trend with all his movies that when they come out, they're not
mixed.
Necessarily welcome to very mixed reviews. And then after a few years, people are saying masterpiece.
And then it's also, if there's any filmmaker that you really just have to surrender yourself over to his movies, it's Terrence Malick.
The dream, narration and the images and the man versus nature
and you
themes.
really get like caught up in them. It really casts a spell over you, and that definitely was like that with The New World. And also, I gotta say, The Thin Red Line, which I always loved. Mm-hmm. Like I was an emotional wreck watching this movie again. It just really, really, really hit me. And Terrence Malick, another word that you use to describe him, is reclusive, private, enigmatic, and he does not give interviews. The last time he gave an actual press interview was 1979. But someone caught him back in 2005 during the making of The New World, and he said about this film, which would apply to all of his movies if you think about it, says, I knew it would have a slow rolling pace. Just get into it. It's more of an experience I leave it to you to fend for yourself, figure things out for yourself. And that's the case with all of his movies.
Yeah, and I think they are so open. You don't have to, you can read as much into them as you like, or you can just let them wash over you, or you can look at them very generally and then you can find something that you relate to, no matter what.
Well, definitely, how did you cut this wonderful life without not really knowing much about him to begin with?
Yeah, there's not many photos that exist of Terrence Malick. Definitely no photos of him as a kid.
Right.
So yeah, this wonderful life in terms of the editing isn't that exciting, but in terms of the content, of course it is. So let's have a look at Terrence Malick's wonderful life.
Terrence Frederick Malick was born on November 30th, 1943 in Ottawa, Illinois. Malick's first brush with film came in 1969 when he directed the 17-minute short film Leighton Mills and earned his Master's of Fine Arts at the American Film Institute Conservatory. After writing the screenplays for 1972's Pocket Money and 1973's Deadhead Miles, Malick made his featured directorial debut with 1973's Badlands, which is widely hailed as one of the greatest directorial debuts since Citizen Kane. You could say it's the Citizen Kane of directorial debuts. Badlands was the first of 7 features that Malick directed over the last 43 years, including his latest release, Night of Cups. He won the Palme d'Or twice, first for 1978's Days of Heaven and again for 2011's The Tree of Life, and he was nominated for 3 Academy Awards.
Do you like that, Pit Boss, throwing that in there?
Well, that has to be the Citizen Kane of voiceovers.
Oh my gosh.
Way to go, Ken. Thanks, Pit Boss.
I know, it's so funny. He just put that in himself. I love
Couldn't
it.
help himself, right?
No.
Well, what is your first blood? What was the first Terrence Malick movie that you ever saw?
The first one was Badlands.
Oh, really? You saw Badlands?
Yeah, I feel like I say this over and over again in profiles, but I went through that time when I was a teenager where I used to go and just rent a bunch of videos at the video store, and so I would try a range of things. So I got out Badlands, and I loved it. And it's still my personal favorite Malick movie. And we will get into more why later on, but basically I think I could relate to it because of the way that Sissy Spacek's character sees the world almost like a movie, like not real. And because I was so escapist with the movies I watched, I think I could relate to it in that way. Plus, the 50s. I mean, I romanticized that decade, and it's definitely about that romantic 50s Americana with like bad boy edge. And
it definitely inspired a lot. We'll definitely get into all that. My first blood was The Thin Red Line, which I saw in theaters on Christmas Day in 1998. And, we'll get into all this as well. But The Thin Red Line is a movie that came out and it was unfairly compared to Saving Private Ryan, another World War II movie that came out like 5 months earlier. And at the time, yes, I did like Saving Private Ryan more. It's more straightforward. It's not a subtle film, whereas The Thin Red Line most definitely is. And that's why over the years, especially when I caught it on cable, I would keep it on. And that's really where I fell in love with it. And now I really feel like between the two movies, The Thin Red Line is the better film.
I think so too.
We'll get into that.
We'll get into that. Also, just want to give a shout out to JTE, who is watching YouTube Live, and he says that he misses engineering profiles.
Well, we miss you big time, JTE, buddy boy.
Yeah.
Yay, we love JT.
Thanks for watching. And everyone who's watching right now, Billy Polahan and Dan Allen, Mark Tordai, all the usual, Joshua Price. Thank you so much to all our profilers who watch even the weird episodes.
We love our profilers. They've been with us through thick and thin,
love it.
Through instantly accessible people like George Clooney and polarizing figures like Terrence Malick.
Love it. So should we get into our Fast Five?
Let's do it.
At number 5 is...
Come on, hit me. Hit me. Come on, son, hit. Give me some. Show me what you got.
Tree of Life.
The Tree of Life.
There wasn't that many audio clips to from.
This was a tough episode to do,
all of
right?
his movies, yeah. There's a lot of music.
This one came out on May 27th, 2011. Cost $32 million. Total box office was $54 million worldwide. 3 Oscar nominations, including directing, Best Picture, and cinematography for Emmanuel Lubezki. Chivo, incredible, just won his 3rd straight Oscar. This movie also won the top prize, the Palme d'Or, at the Cannes Film Festival. And when awarding the prize, the jury member Robert De Niro said, quote, it had the size, the importance, the scope, the intention, whatever you want to call it, that fit the prize.
Yeah, well, it's funny because when it first screened in Cannes, half of the audience booed, half of the audience cheered, and that sums up the way I feel about Tree of Life. When I first saw it, I wasn't sure about it, just because of the mixture between the flashback memories, which I liked about the family, and then the whole section about the birth of mankind and humanity and the earth in general, the Big Bang, there's dinosaurs. But now more and more when I rewatch it, just those scenes are so beautiful that I just watch them in awe with the music and almost see it like two separate films, or like an intermission in between.
I thought you were going to say like you'd see it like 2001.
Exactly.
A Space Odyssey, because of Douglas Trumbull. Yeah. Douglas Trumbull, it was the first movie he did visual effects on since Blade Runner, which came out in 1982. So that's a big gap. But this is a film that, if you want to wrap your head around it, is the birth and death of human existence. Yeah. And, you know, when you see it a few times and you try to say, well, what's he trying to say here? And, like, there's that scene when you see the dinosaur is going to step on the other one's head and he decides not to. Yep. And it's like, oh, okay, he had a moment of consciousness. And right when that happened, the meteor hit the Earth, wiping out the dinosaurs. Yep. The fragility of life on a universal scale.
Nature. He's always exploring nature and grace and mankind.
And also on a personal scale, when you know Brad Pitt finds out that his son died, and he finds out over the phone, and I just assumed that it was Vietnam. Because they never actually said how the kid died, how Sean Penn's brother died, but it is an exquisite, beautiful film. It's epic and ambitious in its scope, and it's just a film that, I remember when it came out, people were like, I hate this movie. Oh, and here's a funny story. So I had seen the film, and then my folks from Philadelphia came out to LA. It was Memorial Weekend. So I took them to see The Tree of Life. Yeah. So, my mom fell asleep. And so we went out to dinner afterwards all fine. Yeah. And so we sit down, and, we get drinks. And my dad, who's, pretty conservative guy, he says, okay, what the F was that about? My dad, I was like, Dad, whoa. It was kind of shocking.
I love it. Well, for his sixth feature film, I mean, it's so big, like you said, huge in scope, but I love the way it shows memories. I think this is probably one of the best movies I've ever seen to capture what it feels like being a child and growing up, where you hear snippets of conversation, you're trying to put together what happened yourself, you remember things out of order, you remember bits and pieces, and you maybe remember people not exactly how they were. Like Brad Pitt's character is very harsh, Jessica Chastain's mother is very childlike and sort of whimsical, and so I think I loved the way that it shows memories. But it's so interesting how Sean Penn, he was talking about afterwards making the movie, because it's very different the way it was scripted. And I wrote down over here one of his quotes that he said, the screenplay was the most magnificent one that I'd ever read, but I couldn't find that same emotion on screen. A clearer and more conventional narrative would have helped the film without, in my opinion, lessening its beauty and its impact. Wow. But then many other critics, including Roger Ebert, said that The Tree of Life is a film of vast ambition and deep humility, attempting no less than to encompass all of existence and view it through the prism of a few lives. The only other film I've seen with this boldness is 2001: A Space Odyssey.
And it definitely has, with the classical music and the visual effects and everything. And Kevin Shaw, I don't think we've read a comment from this profile before.
No,
says,
hi, Kevin.
While fully aware of the fact that this movie divides many, I'm one of the few people who really does love The Tree of Life. Terrence Malick crafted such a beautiful and surreal portrayal of American suburbia. Brad Pitt as the father was fantastic, and this was my first introduction to Jessica Chastain.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first one that I really remembered her.
Yeah,
I was like, who's that?
Yeah, who was that? And lucky her that she's making a movie with Brad Pitt and Terrence Malick. My appreciation for this movie is largely credited to the fact that it turned me on to art house cinema. Since seeing this movie, I now love to go to my local art house theater and support the unique, independent, and art films that are being screened. Hooray! Needless to say, The Tree of Life was a big reason why I'm now a #film geek.
Yes,
wow.
Love it.
Love
that.
Awesome.
And gosh, the cinematography in this movie, the special effects, everything, it's just so beautiful.
It really is.
So I think people should give it another go.
Absolutely give it another go.
But you might not like it still.
But, if you're listening or you're watching any one of these films, if you didn't like them, give it another try. If you never saw them, this is your chance. We want to introduce you to the beauty of Terrence Malick. I think more than any other person we've ever profiled, this is the one where people say, hey, I never saw this film, or I never saw Tree of Life, but I watched it because of profiles, and I loved it. Or
that's great. Or I didn't like it.
But
that's
hey,
fine.
That's cool. You gave it a try.
Yeah, I love that. So there was obviously lots of great scenes that he's directed. What would be your favourite scene, your right stuff?
I would say I'm gonna go with the scene that struck me the first time I saw it versus one that sort of grew on me, because then I definitely have a lot to choose from. When I first saw The New World, and the opening scene when Wagner's music is playing, and it's the prelude to Rheingold, and the music is swelling, and the Native Americans are seeing the tall ships for the first time, and they are in awe, and they're all excited, and they're all like ducking behind the trees and the bushes, and like, oh my God, look, wow, and the ships are just sailing. This is Jamestown, Virginia, and they're just sailing up the river, and when you know what's going to happen to the Native Americans, it's the beginning of the end for them, because it's ultimately a tragic film. But that scene, like when I went back and saw it again, just the music, just the way it swelled and built up and built up, and it just really really captured the sense
music.
of awe.
I mean, Terrence Malick is so great with music and all the scores that he chooses. I'm going to go with From Days of Heaven, the locust sequence.
Yeah.
I love both the way it looks on screen and then the way it was shot. So it's the one where the big swarm of locusts go out.
Extraordinary.
Go out from that, when it's the fire and everything. So how they shot that was apparently they dropped peanut shells from helicopters, and then they got the actors to walk backwards, and they ran the film backwards through the camera.
Oh, wow.
When they played it at normal speed, it looked like locusts flying.
That was, it's a gorgeous scene. I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
It's striking.
And, there's a lot to talk about. We'll get into that. And,
So much to
another
talk
film
about.
that I was going to pick for our best scene, I'll get to when we talk about that movie. I'll say what it is, because when I was watching this movie again, I was like shaking my head going like, man, this is an amazing scene. But speaking of The New World, coming in at Fast Five, number 4 is...
All the children of the king were beautiful, but she, the youngest, was so exceedingly so that the sun himself, though he saw her often, was surprised whenever she came out into his presence.
The New
The
World.
New World, right. December 25th, 2005. 1 Oscar nomination for cinematography. Emmanuel Lubezki, surprise, surprise. Cost $30 million to make. Total box office worldwide was $30 million. Actually, it was 30.5. And again, a movie that I really, really liked a lot when I saw it in the middle of the decade, and then as it turned out to be one of the best movies of the decade.
Yeah, and that's what many people say. At first maybe they weren't sure about it. Now that they say it's one of the best films from the decade. Malick started working on the script in the 70s, and it was greenlit in 2004. Supposed to come out in November 2005, but he was still editing right down to the last minute. And then I think it screened for critics in December 2005, and it was like a longer,
it was
much longer version,
150
minutes, I think, and then they pared it down to 135 minutes. But this is an incredible film. I mean, both in terms of its look, the cinematography. This was his first collaboration with Emmanuel Lubezki, and he's still working with him today. The musical score is beautiful.
It is.
The acting, I mean, Colin Farrell has never been better, in my opinion. Koryanka Kilcher. She was
fantastic.
Beautiful and striking, and she brought something really fresh to the role. And she was a singer turned actress. And then the authenticity, I mean, down to the location, the use of Native Americans, but then beyond that, the use of ancient language that's all but extinct, but they recreated it for the movie. And then the actors had to improvise.
Right, after all that.
Improvise, but be really authentic to the time.
It's a challenging film to make. It's a challenging film to watch and appreciate the first time you see it. But what I liked about this film, too, was, when you're reading about American history and you're just reading it from textbooks, it sort of idolizes and idealizes the discovery of the New World. And what I liked about the New World, the movie itself, is the way it was gritty. I mean, they had a hard time, and it's a tragedy. The loss of innocence, not just for Pocahontas, which she's never actually called Pocahontas, but it is Pocahontas and John Smith. But the loss of innocence on her scale, but also the loss of innocence of Native Americans.
Yeah, well, I say it like, mankind's mankind's impulse to tame things that are wild and should be left wild, but we've got to tame it. They've got to tame the New World and make it fit their lifestyle, and then tame their Native Americans, like when, not giving anything away, but when Pocahontas becomes more English in the way she dresses.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's not her, and she starts speaking in English, and it just doesn't feel right.
And when you see that she's wearing,
at the start, she's so free.
She's so free. She's one with the land and with
wind,
the people,
yeah.
and she's wearing just this like skimpy little outfit just to cover what she needs to get covered. And then when she becomes more English and she has to wear that suffocating dress,
heavy outfit,
and she just looks so miserable. And then when she goes to London, and it's so overwhelming and so congested, and it's so built up compared to where she grew. I mean, it's a tragedy. And I actually reviewed this back in 2005. I said the theme of Paradise Lost has always been prevalent in Malick's films, but never more so than in The New World. When the natives first see the tall English ship sailing towards them, their wondrous reaction is undermined by an impending sense of dread when you consider their eventual fate. And when it comes to Malick's movies, the performances take a backseat to the lush, mesmerizing canvas that he paints.
Oh, yeah.
The pacing may be slow, but it does set a mood that more patient moviegoers will be able to appreciate in turn. They will be rewarded with an unforgettable cinematic experience that will stay with them for days.
Yeah, nature is so beautiful. Again, man versus nature.
Yep.
And Dan Skip Allen has this to say about The New World. It's a sweeping epic about love and discovery. Malick takes viewers on a journey as we all discover this new world together. Newcomer Kirianka, I want to say it right. Kirianka, I said it right. Kirianka Kilcher is a revelation as Pocahontas, acting beside Colin Farrell's John Smith. The cinematography is breathtaking as always in a Malick film, and I haven't seen a historical film like this very often. It's a brilliant, beautiful movie. Christian Bale's great in it too.
He is great in it. And yes, thank you, Dan Skip Allen, for a brilliant, beautiful review.
Yeah, that's nice.
But, for a guy who makes 7 movies over the course of 43 years, what's some interesting trivia that you have for our last detail?
I think one of the most interesting things about Terrence Malick is the way he'll sometimes cut actors completely out of the edit once they've already filmed all their scenes.
Yeah.
So Mickey Rourke was one who was cut from the Thin Red Line. One person who was cut. Not a frame exists of his performance in the final movie, and he said it was a shame because it was some of the best work he's ever done. Also, Bill Pullman and Lucas Haas were cut as well. And then there's that history of it. Rachel Weisz was cut from To the Wonder. I mean, it must be disappointing for an actor. And at the same time, when we spoke to a lot of the actors in Night of Cups, they also made it exciting because they were like, we didn't know if we would be in the film or not. We were just doing our thing.
Adrian Brody, even though he was in the film, he was upset. Yeah, he was upset that when he saw the final movie and he saw how much had been used.
And I think that was the same with Sean Penn with Tree of Life, because he had much more to say in the original script, and then they cut him down, so he's kind of just thinking and looking out, and he's not really acting.
And you get to the very end of the Thin Red Line, and there's George Clooney.
Yeah.
And then the movie's over.
I know, it just has that cameo.
Yeah, it's basically what it is. But I love that Terrence Malick, this enigmatic, mysterious, reclusive, interesting, fascinating director, is a huge fan of Zoolander.
Oh, really?
He's a big fan of Zoolander.
That's funny.
You would not expect a director like that to be a fan of a movie like Zoolander,
That's
but
great.
there you go.
That's so funny. Well, Terry thought that Martin Sheen was too old for the role in Badlands, and Sissy Spacek spoke about it. She said, I was cast first. I got to do scenes with every good-looking actor in Hollywood, and then Terry said, we have to make this guy as a favor, but he's too old. That was Martin Sheen, but it was obvious immediately. From the moment we met him, it was Kit. He had the boots and everything.
Well, one last thing regarding trivia about Terrence Malick isn't really about Terrence Malick. It's about Roger Ebert.
Yeah.
We read his reviews all the time here on Profiles, and To the Wonder was the last movie that Roger Ebert reviewed.
Oh, wow. And he was a big Terrence Malick fan, wasn't he?
Major fan. In fact, when I was going back and looking at the reviews for the movies we've been talking about, all the films that he wrote back in the day, instead of having the perspective of going back and re-reviewing them, he gave them all 4 stars.
Yeah,
he was definitely a big supporter of Malick, and it's like the movie like To the Wonder, which definitely not his best film, but just because of just the dreamy scope of the movie and the title To the Wonder, that was his last movie. I thought that was kind of apropos.
Poignant.
Yes.
Yeah, very nice. All right, so now let's keep moving. At number 3 in our Fast Five, it is...
Don't tell me. I already know. All that kind of your unhappy life, all that shit. Well, I'm telling you, we gotta do something about it. Can't expect anybody else to.
Days of Heaven, released September 13th, 1978, cost $3 million. Total box office, just over $3 million. Won four Academy Award nominations, including sound, costume design, and music for Ennio Morricone, who just won his first Academy Award.
Finally!
But this was the first time he ever got nominated. So that's interesting. And it did win for cinematography, and it also won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival in 1979, which means that Terrence Malick won the Palme d'Or twice.
Pretty amazing. And the cinematography you mentioned, that's what really stands out to me about this film. A lot of it was shot at magic hour. It was all shot using natural light. And they based the cinematography on silent films and also on paintings.
Wow.
And apparently some of the crew didn't understand what was going on. They were like, what? We set up all these lights. You're not going to use them? But Malick knew exactly what he was doing. And this is just such a beautiful movie. People were waiting to see what he would do after Badlands, his second film. And man, he really surprised everyone with this movie.
Yeah.
Because it is a feast for your senses. Beautiful cinematography, then the score, the tragic story.
It is a sweeping tragic story.
Juxtaposed with the beautiful look of it, the heavenly look.
Well, the story itself, for a lot of people who may not be familiar with the movie, co-stars Richard Gere, Brooke Adams, and Sam Shepard. It's a love triangle, and Richard Gere's character is trying to convince Brooke Adams to they're farmers, and he's trying to convince her to marry the farm owner,
and he's
who's
pretending
wealthy.
to be her brother, but they're actually together.
So they're it's a sham because Sam Shepard's character is dying. So if she marries him, then she gets his fortune, and then they get their fortune. But the problem is that she really falls for him.
Yeah.
And it's like it really hits you. Like you really feel the impact of this love triangle because Gere is off to the side watching the two of them, and he realizes.
And then Sam Shepard's character starts to suspect something. It's amazing. And a lot of this came together in the edit, and I think he took 3 years to edit the film.
That's correct.
Apparently.
Took 3 years.
Added the narration later, which was all improvised by Linda Mantz.
Linda Mantz.
Almost a relation.
No T in her name, but there is a T in mine. But I feel like Malick's flair for imagery really took shape with Days of Heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, it was great in Badlands, his first movie, but this is really where, when you think of a Malick movie, this is where it really came to fore.
Pushed the boundaries of what cinema could be, and this was one of those movies again that made me realize, it can be art. Film can be art.
Yeah, totally.
Moving art.
And speaking of Ebert, he said about Days of Heaven, this is a movie made by a man who knew how something felt and found a way to evoke it in us. And Daily Variety, and even at the time, said one of the great cinematic achievements of the 1970s.
And Joshua Price, who's watching live, says the ironic tragedy of Days of Heaven is just painful. JT said he has to go, but he gave us a high five.
High five, JT.
And then everyone's trying to guess what will be our number one. We are counting them down. And then we have a great comment from Zalk Milchu, who says, Days of Heaven is my favorite Malick film and one of my top 20 films of all time. I consider it one of the last masterpieces of the American New Wave era. There is a subtle poetic sadness that complements some of the most gorgeous landscape cinematography ever set to film. The exclusive use of natural lighting, particularly during the magic hour after sundown, gives the movie a sense of both period realism and dreamlike beauty. There are countless unforgettably classic images. For example, the train crossing the bridge, the shot of the wine glass from underwater, and of course, the locusts and the ensuing epic fire in the fields. Malick is a master of telling a story visually, and his mastery was never better exemplified than in Days of Heaven. What a brilliant comment.
That is a brilliant comment.
Claps for Zalk.
Way to go, Zalk. A nice job. And I looked at his name. I'm like, I don't recognize this guy.
This is great.
I read his comment. I was like, wow, it's like a new profile. This is awesome.
Awesome.
Well, we always like to do the others when we talk about films that didn't quite make our Fast Five, but should have. Malick is not one of those filmmakers who have
a lot lot
a whole lot of movies.
And we both agreed maybe To the Wonder is not the best.
Right.
So we decided The Other.
It's The Other.
Which is Knight of Cups.
Knight of Cups. So what did you love most? And what is Knight of Cups about?
So Knight of Cups is about a screenwriter played by Christian Bale, and he is struggling with a midlife crisis, and he's wandering through Hollywood, figuring out his way amongst the excess and the womanizing that he does. It's a collection of memories and a stream of consciousness movie, definitely very experimental.
Yeah.
It has a loose structure in that it has 8 chapters, and each chapter has a different woman in his life or a different person from his past, but a lot of narration, a lot of dreamlike moments, all completely improvised. But I can't stop thinking about this film. I really loved it. I related to it on such a strong level, I think, because it's about LA and starting over, and we were talking about that, how we both did that.
Yep.
And that's something that everyone really does. When they can't move to LA,
it's very true.
Start over, anything's possible here. At the same time, it's a weird city where it's always sunny and doesn't feel real.
Well, I was also trying to think of another movie where I saw LA like this, and I couldn't think of one. I mean, there have been other films about LA,
Lots,
like Swingers and
Player.
LA Story, The Player, but this was shot through a romantic haze. It doesn't make LA look bad, but it just sort of makes it look dreamy, and for the dreamlike state of the film, it's very, very fitting. So, of course, the reviews are mixed. Which is not uncommon for a new Malick film.
Yeah.
So the question is, what will it be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? But I'm with you. I really like this film a lot.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if I would, to be honest.
I just in terms of like this guy taking stock in his life, trying to reassess and reevaluate his priorities and his relationships with his father, played by Brian Dennehy, his brother, played by Wes Bentley, and the women in his life, played by Cate Blanchett and Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
And it was a movie that definitely stayed with you, with me, long after it was over.
I need to see it again. I just keep going over and over it in my head and thinking about it. It's just so beautiful. But we did a great bracket on our Profiles Facebook page. So thank you to everyone who took part and also everyone who ran it. So basically what they did was, I love this, they did 4 of Malick's films put up against each other, but then the winner of those 4 has to face Thin Red Line. And they already decided that Thin Red Line was great.
Okay, that's cool.
So it was Badlands versus The New World. Who do you think won out of those 2?
Badlands.
Yes.
Okay.
Days of Heaven versus The Tree of Life.
Days of Heaven.
No, The Tree of Life.
Oh, okay, good.
So then it was Badlands versus The Tree of Life.
Badlands.
Yep. So then it came down to
Badlands
versus The Thin Red Line. What do you think won?
Thin Red Line?
Yes, The Thin Red Line
Thin Red
is
Line.
the Profiler's favourite movie, and I can definitely see why. Thanks to Liam Logrand and every one of our Profilers who gets involved, who runs it for us. I love our Facebook page, and I love our people.
Speaking of our Facebook page, make sure you go to our Facebook page, which is Profiles with Malone and Mantz.
Yes.
Like our Facebook page so we can keep you up to date on all the happenings on our show, and it's a great community that we've built up of film geeks and profilers for life. And so it's at Profiles with Malone and Mantz. And while you're at it, go to iTunes. And even if you're listening or watching the show right now on YouTube or listening to it on iTunes, make sure you rate and review our podcast on iTunes and review it and let us know what you think. And make sure you follow us on Twitter at Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz, at Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz. At Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz.
Yeah, and if you want to look as cool as us, then these Film Geek t-shirts, then you can go to tpublic.com/user/profiles and buy. We've got all sorts of t-shirts there. Funny enough, today I was in a restaurant and a guy came up to me and said, "Are you Alicia Malone?" And I was like, yeah, I'm wearing a t-shirt with my name on it. But I was like, yeah, and he gave me a It was nice.
Oh,
that
was
was
nice.
Fan. That was sweet.
Oh, that's so
I was like,
sweet.
Cookie, yes. I
You
love
never know
cookies.
who's watching.
I know, so it's nice. Yeah.
That's very cool. What kind of cookie was it?
Chocolate chip.
Yes, chocolate chip. Oh, you're like, really? You're going to force me to take this
I was
chocolate chip cookie?
You know the way to my heart.
Very nice.
All right, well, let's keep going, shall we, with our Fast Five number
2, which is...
My mother died of pneumonia when I was just a kid. My father had kept their wedding cake in the freezer for 10 whole years. After the funeral, he gave it to the yard man.
Badlands.
Love Badlands.
I know it's your personal favorite. It came out October 15th, 1973, which means you were minus 8 years old. Terrence Malick's directorial debut, and a dazzling debut at that. I guess the best way to pitch this movie is it's Rebel Without a Cause meets Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, that's right. It was kind of loosely inspired by the true story of a young James Dean wannabe and the murder spree he and his younger girlfriend went on. And Malick started to work on this film during his second year as a student at the American Film Institute, then continued the screenplay when he was 27 while on a road trip. This is a completely independent movie. Malick put $25,000 of his own money into it, and then he raised the rest from doctors and dentists and professional people. Then it was distributed by a bigger studio.
Yep.
But I love how independent it is. As I said, my first film of Malick's, my favorite, because I love how it's this mythic look at this couple, romance, crime, America, and I said the decade that I romanticize all the time, the 50s.
Yeah.
I love 50s movies. I love any 50s fashion. I love watching films in the 50s because it's got that, I don't know, I think I go, it should be simpler times.
Yeah,
you know?
there's an innocence to the 50s.
There's innocence to the 50s, and this movie is about boredom and about freedom. And the thing that I love the most is how deadpan her narration is as Sissy Spacek's character, because it's perfectly detached from what she's actually doing.
And so is he. He is also detached.
Yeah.
And you're realizing that they are actually a match made in heaven or hell, depending on how you look at it. And, Martin Sheen just shoots first and asks questions. Actually, he doesn't ask questions at all. He just shoots first,
yep.
and he's, they're going out in a blaze of glory. And this is a film that definitely inspired Natural Born Killers and inspired True Romance, especially the music. They used a lot of the music.
Yeah, the music.
For the music by George Tipton. And the New York Times loved Badlands and said it's a cool, sometimes brilliant, always ferociously American film, important and exciting.
Again, about man's relationship to nature, the idyllic life in the treehouse, and then the wilderness and the desolate landscape of the Badlands of Montana. And like I said before, I think because I used to escape into movies, I would relate to someone who looks at life like a little bit away, like it is a movie.
Yeah.
And I was just swept up by the beauty of this film and the storyline, and yeah, it sucked me in, and I love watching it.
And when you do watch it, if you really want to know what Terrence Malick looks like, he has a cameo in this movie.
Comes up to the door.
And I thought, okay, I get it. Maybe he's like going for like the Hitchcock thing where he shows up a little bit in each of his films. No, this was it.
Yeah, this was it. And Christian Bale actually talks about why in our interview.
Yes, which we're going to get to in a second as soon as we read from one of our profilers, this one from Cindy NG about Badlands. With Badlands, Malick shows how films can transcend storylines with visual poetry. He is a genius in the art of using landscapes and imagery, and I just love each shot of this film. Add to that a serial killer and his teenage and passive girlfriend, perfectly rendered by Sheen and Spacek, a haunting voiceover, and an evocative score.
Now it is time to listen to and watch, if you're watching on YouTube, our interview with Christian Bale. How nice was he?
He couldn't have been nicer.
He was so sweet.
He was so cool.
It was so funny because, I was, you know best that I used to be addicted to Red Bull, and then I hadn't had one in a long time, months. And I was like, I might have one. And then as we walked in, he was like, enjoy a Red Bull? Oh, yeah.
Gotcha.
And then the interview started, and as you'll hear, he asked us all sorts of questions about profiles, and I love how interested he was. And then it was so fascinating to hear him talk.
It was just a real great conversation. It wasn't an interview. It felt like a real genuine conversation.
Yeah.
Couldn't have been nicer. And he really does shed a light on work. I mean, he's now worked with him 3 times because the next movie that Malick has coming out, it's called Weightless. Christian Bale was in that as well. That doesn't have a release date. It could come out next year. It could come out in 10 years.
Who knows?
Who knows? But here is the conversation with Christian Bale.
Okay. Who are we talking for?
We're gonna set this up for you. The name of the show is Profiles with Malone and Mantz, and we profile the greatest filmmakers of all time. And this show, we are profiling the work of the great Terrence Malick.
Yes.
Right.
So thank you so much for joining us.
But if you're profiling just the greatest filmmakers of all time, you must have like 6 shows and then you're done.
No.
No, we have so many.
This
we
is
go
our
foreign
49th.
films.
Oh, you're quite open-minded about who the
And
greatest
classic.
filmmakers are.
Yeah.
Well, there's a
Kurosawa.
lot.
You know.
You got Kurosawa,
Did
got
you-
John Williams, composers.
Okay. Oh, so
Actors.
you're not necessarily interviewing them.
No. No.
Sometimes
All right,
we
so
are.
you might be interviewing you about and filmmakers past.
Yeah, we had a Hitchcock
As
show
well.
and we had 3 Hitchcock
Oh,
blondes
good.
call in to talk to us
So
about Hitchcock.
where can I see this?
YouTube.com.
It's on the Popcorn Talk Network. But we're going to make it easy for you. I'm going to send the link to the show to Jen, and she'll forward it to you. So, right? She's got this down, and you got this down. But, we profiled...
Sounds quite interesting.
We
Yeah.
profiled
You did
Nolan.
the piece on Kurosawa?
Yeah.
Yes.
Already?
Yeah.
And a lot of people watching the
Bell
show
Gates.
who had never seen a Kurosawa movie,
Right.
after hearing us talk about Kurosawa, they're like,
They still haven't.
and
They rushed out.
they
Still
rushed
haven't.
out. They're like, I never saw Seven Samurai. I never saw Rashomon until
Yeah.
you guys were talking about it. So now that we're talking about Malick's movies, and you've now, including the next one, you've now done 3.
And I remember when I was a teenager, I saw Badlands, and I felt like my head kind of exploded a bit.
Yeah, it's so wonderful.
So I'm curious.
50 space setting, my
Oh,
machine is
so
bloody
great.
great in it, And Terry's in it.
Yeah.
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 Answering the door. That was quite funny because the actor just didn't turn up that day. But he told me that he couldn't stop giggling the whole way through because
Really?
he realised suddenly when you're actually in the scene how much actors are just kind of heightening the reality. So he said he couldn't stop laughing all the time throughout.
So what was your first experience with Terrence Malick's work, and what struck you the most about his style?
I went to see a double feature at some place that does kind of cheap theatre in LA, and it was Badlands and Days of Heaven, and I had a similar experience to what you said. With Badlands, just loving it. And then I was down. I was very depressed about something that happened, and my wife took me down to Chile to kind of backpack around. And I got, on the same day, I got these emails in its infancy. Like, I barely check emails now, but and Terry doesn't use emails, but I got an email from Werner Herzog saying, hey, did I want to go make a film with him? And I was like, oh yeah, I love Werner. And then from Terry saying, would I just go, not to meet with him, but just to read something for him? You often read scripts for a director and they have no intention of casting you ever in the film, but they just want to hear it out loud. And so I said, oh, I agree. So then I met up with Terry. I had auditioned for The Thin Red Line and not gotten it, but I never met him. And then met with Terry, sat and read, and then he did actually call back and say, actually I think there's a role for you in the New World, and I'd love to have you play John Rolfe. And so that's how it started. And I just love his company, love his approach to filmmaking, and we kept in touch. And then we ended up doing Night of Cups.
When it comes to a movie like The New World, I feel like it's a film that's been 11 years since it came out. It really grows on you, and it means new things every time you see it. But for you, what was it like working with him on that first movie, and what did you make of he sort of has an unconventional directing style.
Yeah, but I'm very comfortable with the way that he likes to work, because initially I started quite late on that film. And I knew some of the crew, and I would call them and say, so how's it going, what are they doing? And they said, well, there's a lot of improvisation. And I'm thinking, oh God, this is the 1600s. So I was in London, and I headed down to the British Library, and I was just going through everything I could, because I thought, I've got to have all the language down, I've got to know the exact history, I've got to know everything. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is going to be a massive volume of information I've got to remember. And then found, oh, not in the slightest. When you get there, Terry's all about, just sincerity. At that point, he did have a script for the New World, but most of the time would just sort of throw it out. But, yes, he wanted a lot of improvisation, but understood that an awful lot of it wouldn't be useful. I mean, for instance, I remember I made the mistake of having John Rolfe actually discover the concept of gravity before Newton did, because there was a scene and Terry told me to improvise and I explained gravity and he said that was great, but Newton hadn't actually done that yet, so we just kind of changed history there. But the thing that's very different from Terry is there's a lot of directors and they want to rehearse beforehand, and look, there's benefits to both. I'm not saying one is better than the other, it's just different, and Terry's on his journey. But for Terry, rehearsing kind of kills it. So he wants you to, he's filming, the motto's kind of film before we're ready. Like he says, you ready? No, great, go. Because he likes to have that spontaneity of trying to figure it out as you go, not having a goal at the end of each scene, so you're not sort of having that sense of achievement at the end, so it's more kind of let's see what happens. I would often, I like to fall asleep on set. It's just something I sort of enjoy doing. And so he would sometimes just film me asleep or then just wake me up and say, hey, go into that other room and start talking with so-and-so. And I would walk in kind of bleary-eyed, not really knowing, and just start talking with them. And you see what happens. Or he would come to me and he'd recognize that, okay, this scene, we were starting to repeat ourselves. Literally, in that you could see the actor was starting to find his groove in the scene, which most directors go, great, now we're starting to find it, now we got something. And Terry's the opposite. He goes, all right, now it's ruined, because now you sort of are trying to get it right, and we should never have that sense. So he would just say to me, well, where do you want to go shoot this? And I would go, I think that I would go walk under that tree and film. So we'd go do that. And he's so collaborative and really loves new ideas. He loves working with people. He has incredibly experienced people working with him. Chiba being one of his main collaborators, Jack Fisk as well. But he also really likes to have absolute beginners as well, and have that kind of sense of discovery in people who don't have any technique. I think he's kind of anti-technique. So it's lovely. It was a great experience. And then with Night of Cups, we just took it a step further, where he went, you know what, we kept on throwing the script out on the New World. How about we just don't even have a script for this one?
So did you know how it would end up looking at all?
No, not at all. He would sometimes give me a GoPro and just send me off with the other actors, and we'd go shoot a scene by ourselves about whatever, or go in the ocean and shoot something, and I'd just bring back the GoPro, he'd have a look, and it was either, Christian, there's nothing we can use here, or, oh, that's a lovely moment there you got. And, you never knew who he was filming, even if it might be, I never have much to say in Night of Cups. Most of the time he wanted me to be quiet and listen. Exactly. He's a man of words who's kind of lost the ability to use words.
Yeah, I like that.
And so every day was a complete surprise. I went in, you got to just be comfortable with going and going, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing today.
A lot of our viewers and listeners are a little younger, and they might not know Terrence Malick's movies, and the whole purpose is for us to introduce them. So what kind of advice would you give to viewers and listeners to sort of bring them into Terrence Malick's world?
Just be a bit bold. Don't go for the normal stuff that that is playing at your local Cineplex. Like be a bit more adventurous. Go and see what other emotions and experiences film can bring to you, because Terry approaches it in a very different manner. So be adventurous, be bold. It's so worth it. You've got one of the, as you guys were saying, one of the absolute best American filmmakers of all time. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us.
So interesting. That was great.
That was cool. That gets a high five. We didn't have one of those in a while.
I know, yeah.
Very, very good. It was just a conversation,
It was great.
And we were his first interview that day.
Yeah.
Which was very, very cool. It was very relaxed, very natural.
Very cool.
No one asked him any stupid questions yet. I'm sure that came later. But yes, that was definitely a very, very special moment for us on our show and your show. So that was very cool. Yes.
Very, very cool.
Moving right on. And see Night of Cups, folks. It's actually very, very good. But just give yourself over to it. Let yourself get consumed by it, and you will get something back.
As we say in Australia, give it a red hot go.
Give it a red hot go.
Now we get to our Fast Five number one, which
has to be...
Colonel, I refuse to take my men up there in a frontal attack. It's suicide, sir. I've lived with these men, sir, for 2.5 years, and I will not order them all to their deaths.
The Thin Red Line, and that's the scene, by the way. Released December 25th, 1998. 7 Oscar nominations, including picture, director, adapted screenplay, and score for Hans Zimmer. Based on the novel by James Jones. This is the quintessential Terrence Malick movie, isn't it?
And it lost Best Picture, too.
To Shakespeare in Love. But you know what? At least Saving Private Ryan is actually in good company.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Thin Red Line, I think, like we were saying before, is a film that I definitely get more and more out of every time I see it. It's an epic war film, as only Malick could make. I mean, deeply philosophical, not at all what most people expected, and by most people I mean the cast.
Yeah, definitely not.
They didn't really know exactly how it would turn out. They didn't know that their roles may be lessened a little bit in favour of nature, because again, it's about man versus nature. But it's also, I think, you know, someone who's luckily enough never had to be involved in a war, it's also what I imagine war must be like, completely disorientating and dreamlike at times, and a lot of waiting, a lot of boredom, then the gritty horribleness of being stuck in there, but the beautiful landscape.
The brilliance of this movie is the way it shows the brutality of war juxtaposed with the beauty of nature, often in the same frame.
Yeah.
You know, I remember there was one scene, one of the soldiers, by one of the actors, you know, not someone well known, you know, he's sitting there ducking, and he's just like looking at a leaf and just looking at the beauty of it, while all around him, all hell is breaking loose. And, you know, like there could be all this gunfire and explosions going on, but yet there are baboons in a tree, just minding their business. And it's just a perfect blend of two extremes.
Incredible cast. So at this stage, everyone knew who Terrence Malick was. All actors were lining up to be involved in his movies. They'd do whatever, big part, small part. So let me just run through some of the names. Sean Penn, Adrian Brody, Jim Caviezel, Ben Chaplin, George Clooney, John Cusack, Woody Harrelson, Nick Nolte, John C. Reilly, John Travolta.
John Travolta, that was like, what? What is he doing in this movie?
I forgot he was in it. I was like, is that John? It is.
But when we were talking about our right stuff, the scene that I was actually going to go with was the scene between Elias Koteas, who plays the captain, and Nick Nolte, and he's on the phone, and Elias is saying, you know, we're outnumbered, I'm not going to send my men up there, and Nick Nolte is screaming his head off, telling him, get your men up there, this is a war. And he's like, it is, the exchange between them is so like riveting and so powerful. And I gotta tell you, this is like the best thing I've ever seen Nick Nolte do.
He was so great, isn't he?
He was so great.
Has such power. And also the scene with Woody Harrelson.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was...
The look in his eye when he realizes,
oh
my
boy,
gosh.
yes.
I mean, you need patience with this movie, but it's definitely worth watching. This was a film that, you know, came out 20 years after his last movie. So no one really knew whether he would come back with another movie.
Yeah.
He was reclusive, but in those 20 years, he read a lot of books, he traveled, he listened to music, he did some bird watching, and then he came back with a bang.
Yeah, and a lot of people thought, oh, he was just like, you know, like checked out, but he was actually developing a bunch of things. You know, there was at one point he was going to direct The Elephant Man, which would have been interesting with knowing his style.
Yeah.
But there were other films that he had been working on, including what became The Tree of Life.
Yeah, and he did a lot of script writing as well, which is why Knight of Cups sort of feels very much like it's based on his life.
Well, Gene Siskel said it's one of the finest contemporary war films I've ever seen, better than Saving Private Ryan and even Platoon. And Mike O'Sullivan from the Washington Post kind of summed it up perfectly. He said, a movie about creation growing out of destruction, about love where you least expect to find it, about angels, especially the fallen kind, who just so happen to be men. And like I said, watching the film again last weekend, I was like an emotional wreck after it was over. Really got to me more than any other time I saw it.
Oh yeah, it's terrifying to watch and beautiful at the same time. Mark Tordai says, The Thin Red Line is a film about juxtaposition and does not hold anything back when showing death among life, war among beauty, and the eradication of one's soul among the search for humanity. It took Malick nearly 20 years to make this film, and while multiple viewings are needed to distinguish between the many characters, it'll be more than worth your time. Unlike its rival, Saving Private Ryan, the beachland landings are uneventful, and the action doesn't take place until 20 minutes into the film. However, between the rhythmic Melanesian music that plays throughout and the deeply emotional performance from the highly talented cast makes The Thin Red Line one of the best and most underrated war movies ever made.
And we give the last word to our pal Liam Logrand.
Yay.
Liam says, The Thin Red Line is my personal favorite film of the 1990s, considering it boasts an incredible ensemble cast. There really isn't a protagonist. Rather, Malick shows the physical and psychological horrors of the Pacific theater had on all American and Japanese soldiers. This is done through compelling and poetic narration from countless soldiers, and that transports audiences to a time of history that is undeniably confronting. All of which is a complete juxtaposition with the luscious and beautiful Henderson Field, which itself is a pivotal character throughout the film. That's a great point. On reflection, I believe The Thin Red Line is far superior than Saving Private Ryan and should have swept the Oscars in 1999. Hashtag Film Geek. Hashtag Profile for Life.
So to recap our Fast Five for Terrence Malick, at number 5, The Tree of Life.
Number 4, The New World.
Number 3, Days of Heaven.
Number 2, Badlands.
Number
and
1,
The Thin Red Line.
We close our books. Pow!
And one last thing before we go, make sure you go to our Facebook page, Profiles with Malone and Mantz. Like our page and make sure you share it. Make sure you tell other film fans to love it too. Make sure you rate and review us on iTunes. It's just called Profiles there. And make sure you follow us on Twitter, at Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz, at Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz. See, Terrence Malick would take a long pause too. At Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz.
We should have done some narration and some dreamlike imagery.
It's so
the
cold.
Wheat, hand through the wheat. Yeah.
It's the heat. It's cold. The air conditioning. It's getting to me. But we'll be back in a few weeks with episode number 50.
Wow.
Number 50 of Profiles. Until next time. Bye.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, Christian Harloff, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of its owners or principals.